Welcome. My name is Sasha Moore, and I'm delighted to moderate today's event on behalf of Trail Homes. We're holding this live webinar with Trail Book Valuation Specialist, Nick Young, to get his insights into how to determine what your brokerage is worth. Because what I didn't realize is there is actually a formula, and what we're going to be doing is getting the lowdown of how this is assessed and how you can also optimize your book. So what we'll be covering today is key metrics to assess your company's performance, what factors to consider when your brokerage is being valued, how to determine the value of your trail book, as well as to calculate the value of your goodwill, why after-tax value of your business is so important, and finally, some top tips to maximize the value of your brokerage. We also encourage you to feed in any questions that you have via the chat function, and we'll either address these if it's really specific to the content that's come through. We'll do that on the spot. Otherwise, we will do so at the end of the session. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Nick. Welcome.
Thank you, Sasha. Good morning.
It is indeed. So let's jump into this. So when we were preparing this webinar, one thing I was not aware of is that there was so many ways to calculate how a brokerage is worth, what that is. And my perception was it's sort of like a house. Like you look at a house and you have a perceived value of your house and somebody else has a perceived value of your house, and you meet somewhere in the middle. So I want to really understand, let's start from the top. If we can go through what the valuation methods are at a very macro level, and then we'll start to drill down into the detail.
Certainly, Sasha. So I like the idea of the buyer and the seller meeting in the middle, and that's generally what happens with trail books as well. Perhaps a good place to start, though, is this idea of a trail book and a mortgage broking business. And the two names are used all the time, sort of in a lazy fashion around the industry. And some people think that a trail book represents a mortgage broking business, and other people think that it's just a trail book. So it really is so important to really be very clear with anybody you're talking with, just exactly what asset you're talking about. So for me, a mortgage broking business has an asset, which is a trail book. So if you like, a trail book is a subset of the business. So when you, in my language, buy a trail book, you don't get any access to the clients or any right to service them. All you're doing is getting the right to receive a trail off an old loan for as long as that loan might last, and bearing in mind that the person you've bought it off has the right to refinance that loan, arguably whenever the client wants to do so. So it's really important to differentiate between the two. So in my mind, we have a trail book, we have a mortgage broking business, and we really need to be clear which asset we're talking about. The other ways of valuing them, so just a straight trail book generally sells a multiple. And typically we see multiples just for a straight trail book of somewhere between, say, 1.5 and say 2.3 times. It varies depending on the runoff. We have at the moment a very high level of runoff. So we're seeing runoff rates of about 25% per annum. So if we had 10 loans, at the end of the year, we expect only 7.5 to be left. If we had 100 loans, we only expect 75 to be left at the end of the year. So at the moment, that's above average. I don't think anybody in the audience will be surprised to hear that there's a lot of refinance going on in the industry. It's getting front page of, the Financial Review. But normally we budget for about 20%. But as I say, at the moment, so multiples are down a little bit, for which we're buying just trail books. The bigger businesses, we might get to a little bit later in the presentation because they're a little bit more involved. There's a few more arms and legs involved there. The other third way that we value a business, and this is really as a business, is EBIT. So for those of you who aren't aware, EBIT stands for earnings before interest and tax. It's a very common accounting term, a lazy definition of profit. And whether you're buying a milk bar, BHP, or a mortgage broking business, a multiple of profit is a very common way to value a small business or even a large business. So, and typically you get to see multiples for a small business of around about 3 times. Again, we'll get into a little more detail as we get into the presentation.
Okay, so we've covered, so just a straight trail book and then the EBIT. Do you have the option where you would do the trail book with Goodwill?
Certainly do. So that's what I call a business. So,
right, okay.
Yeah, so trail book is a subset. Trail book with clients is the business. Got it.
Okay, well, let's then move on. So we talked about the depreciation a little bit in terms of the loan runoff. This is something that I've found quite surprising because I wouldn't expect that the brokers would really be across that particular level. So just me being a bit of a tech moment. Let's get to that slide. So why don't you talk through in terms of some of the facts about trail homes and trail books running off?
Yeah, so I mentioned this 20% runoff. So, and it goes back to the fact that a person historically in Australia has lived in their house for about 7 years and they turn their loans over more frequently. So the historical average is they're turning their loans over every 5 years, which means effectively a 20% runoff. So that's the really old-fashioned rule of thumb. And indeed, we've been doing this now for 20 odd years, more than that actually. And over the course of time, I can tell you, yeah, 20% is about right anecdotally. The moment, yes, we're at about 25. Earlier in the year, in fact, last year, we got up to nearly 30%, which is right off the Richter scale. We're making our way back down to 20% at the moment, although I expect probably to hold at this 25% level for the rest of this year while all these fixed rate loans are running off, and there's a lot of refi that's obviously associated with that. And then as we get into next year, it wouldn't actually surprise me to see it drop below 20%. You may not be aware of this, but following the GFC, which is sort of back in the annals of time now, in the run up to the GFC where the economy was running hard, we saw a lot of refinance, a lot of people borrowing, high runoff rates. And then following the GFC and the valley after the GFC, we actually saw it dropping back down to about 16%, which is very, very low as far as runoff rates. So the moment high, but coming down. So it means that the range, yes, 1.5 to 2.3, it means we're actually probably in the middle of that range at the moment. And if runoff rates drop just for a straight trail book, arguably the multiple will actually increase, but at the moment it's down a little bit. Older loans are better than younger loans.
Yeah, talk me through this because I think that that seems counterintuitive.
So 2 things about that. One, when you buy a loan book, the way the aggregators work, the loans physically move off the seller's aggregation agreement and onto the buyer's aggregation agreement. So it means if a clawback comes through, the buyer is going to be hit with the clawback in the first instance. Now, the buyer might have an arrangement with the sellers to be reimbursed, but as a starting point, you get hit with it as the buyer, and you're going to have to scramble around trying to get money back out of the seller if you do have such an agreement. Otherwise, you're just going to absorb it. So it means loans less than 2 years carry that clawback risk, and that obviously affects its valuation. The other one, and this is a little bit harder to understand, but if we talk about a runoff rate, it means that if you were to do a chart, a percentage chart of loans running off over time, it would actually be convex. So it would have a sort of like a shallow dive and then a very long tail. So it means that effectively, and we'll talk about it again this later, but a trail book will broadly halve every 3 or 4 years, probably every 3 years at the moment. In fact, probably even a little bit less. So it means that as we get to the back end, you actually get a shallower runoff. So it means, again, this older loans is better than younger loans. And the final bit is you'll find, and I'm sure a lot of brokers in the room will be aware of this, brokers often do loans with the intention that it's going to be refinanced quickly. And there's often a very good reason for it. It's a bit of a bridging loan, that sort of scenario. You get all those loans washed out of the system. So again, it just reinforces this idea older loans are better than, it's a bit like wine, I think. So yeah, older loans better than younger. It's not to say we don't like younger loans. It's just we put a little bit more of a premium on the older ones if it's just a straight trail book. Investment loans, arguably an interest-only loan sitting inside a super fund might sit there for years and years and years. So if you're just looking at how long a loan's going to last, that's probably the pinnacle of them. Whereas at the other extreme, probably a first home buyer or fixed rate loans, which by definition will get refinanced every 2-3 years, are less valuable.
Okay, so then in terms of the elements that we need to factor in terms of the brokerage's worth, how do you actually determine that value of the trail book and also calculate the value of Goodwill?
So I might, Sasha, we've got another slide there, which is a lovely chart. It's one of my favourite charts in the world. I have a very boring laugh.
Let's go to that.
One up of the mythical mortgage broking business over time. So this is purely just a mythical business. So, and I'm sure everyone in the room is going, this is the most basic chart I've ever seen in your life, and please tell us something we didn't know. But just to explain it for those people who haven't actually recognised what the two components on it, one is upfront commission and the other one is trail commission. So we're going to start our mortgage broking business on the left-hand side of the chart, ground zero. So the upfronts are going to kick in hopefully straight away. And so to begin with, the upfront commissions are going to be much greater than the trailing commissions. Over time, as we write more loans, the trailing commissions are going to build. And we're going to reach a point in the middle of the chart where approximately the trails equal the upfronts. And then we're going to, in the latter part of the business, we're going to effectively go into a decline phase where the upfronts fall away. So effectively we're on holiday, we're traveling around Australia in a caravan, we're overseas, we are anywhere but answering the phone, pounding the footpath, trying to drum up business. We're making lifestyle choices. So the upfronts fall away and the trail book will hang on and fall away at a slower rate. Now, the importance of this little chart is that the way that trails and upfronts interact, which a lot of mortgage brokers don't realise, but it's actually designed, believe it or not, this was worked out by the lenders some time ago, that for a mature mortgage broker, approximately half of their income would come from upfront commission and half of their income would come from trailing commission. It's not by chance, and it goes back to this average runoff of 20%. Now, what that means is that if your upfront commissions are higher than your trailing commissions, so over at that front part of the graph, your business is growing. If you're in the middle, your business is mature. Your upfronts are broadly equal with your trails. And if your business is in decline, which is the alarming bit, your trails are greater than your upfronts. And I suspect that everybody in the room now should be doing a quick sort of recollection of last month's commission statement and whether or not their upfronts were higher than their trails. And the brutal truth, if they are typically the upfronts higher, your business is growing. If they're about equal, it's mature. And if they're less than your trails, you're in decline. Brutal truth, but that's what it means. So one of the first questions I ask when talking to a prospective broker is, what's your trail book? $100 a week or $100 a month, whatever, great. How much business are you writing? And I'll quickly do a conversion of the upfront commissions that they'll be therefore earning from those settlements and work out whether their business is growing, mature, or in decline.
Okay, I think it's really valuable to look at a business in those three stages. So I might just go to that just to expand on it, because as you say, I imagine that everyone in today's webinar is immediately thinking sort of which category is my business in. So maybe we'll just flesh that out a little bit. So why don't we just talk about some of the characteristics that you've noticed about that expanding business where the upfront income is greater than the trail? What does that high growth phase look like for a business that's in that stage?
So you probably remember it. It's when you started out, you were keen as mustard. You were banging on doors. You were trying new things. You were exploring new opportunities. You were marketing. You were getting up early. You were working hard. That's what an expanding business looks like. And it's also might be bringing on new employees. It might be all sorts of different ways that you can grow a business, but it's looking with your eyes open at different ways of doing it, and you see it in the results. A mature business is a business whereby you're starting to get into a bit of a rhythm. So it's not bad, but broadly, I do a bit of marketing. Yes, I go back over my old client base. I bump into people on the streets, people I'm aware, people talk, I provide a good service. But if you really look at it, you're really in this game of, okay, I've been writing 1 million a month, I've been writing 5 million a month, and I've been doing it for years. And I know arguably I can keep on doing it for years. It's a mature business. It might be very profitable, might not be not so profitable, but it's just a mature business. It just clicks along. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not growing. And if you are going to get it back into growth mode, you're going to have to really think about different ways of doing it. A business in decline, and it sneaks up on you. This is where people start getting seduced by things like work-life balances. Now, I'm not here to advocate, we should burn ourselves out and end up in a cot. But as soon as people, to me, start talking about work-life balances, it means their business is starting to be put into decline. As soon as you start taking your foot off the accelerator, it means your business is going to suffer. There's no ifs and buts about it. If you want to start taking things a little bit more slowly, taking holidays, spending time with the family, absolutely great. But it is a lifestyle choice, and it means that something's going to suffer, and it's going to be your business. So that's something that can sneak up. I also hear people saying to me, oh, I don't have to do any marketing these days. I've got so many old clients and they just ring me up. It just sort of happens. I've been doing this for years. It's a business in decline. And it can sneak up on you very quickly and without you even realizing it. Classic one is when you start thinking about retirement. Now, you might not be planning on retirement, but the moment that it starts entering into your head probably means you should be actually starting to make real moves, because whether you like it or not, subliminally, whatever, your business is probably going to start suffering. Your eyes will be going off the ball. You're not thinking about growing, you're thinking about retiring. It's starting to be a mindset change.
So in terms of then your recommendations, if a broker was looking at the optimal value of their business in both the Goodwill and the Trail, at what stage should a broker start to be having a discussion with a valuation specialist such as you to start to map out next steps?
I think it's never too late it's never too early to start. Arguably, right at the very beginning is when you should be starting to think about how you're going to get the hell out of this business. The structures that you set up, things like, is the business in a legal framework that's going to be easy to solve? Do I own the trail book? Do I own my clients? All these sorts of questions. You'll be amazed at the number of people who come to me saying, can I, sell my trail book? And they find out for the first time they don't even own it. It's quite a sobering experience. Or whether you're in a franchise environment or whether you're not, all these things need to be thought about, and the implications that will arise from that at the back end when you might be trying to sell your business. So the initial planning, really important. The next bit of when you're growing, you're growing, great. I think probably as you start to move again from that growth phase into a mature phase, or if you are in that mature phase, you need to really think about, okay, again, how am I going to get out of this? Am I happy just staying in this mature phase, or should I be trying to make a bit of a push to grow the business and then sell it in a growth phase? Because I can tell you here and now, we will put a higher multiple on a business that's in a growth phase as opposed to a business that's in mature, and certainly a higher multiple on a business that's in decline. To try and turn a business around that's in decline, it's actually hard work. To get a business that's mature and give them another kick on, it's not such hard work. We can do that.
And I guess it's sort of from a business owner's perspective, quite a counterintuitive concept that you're considering the exit of your business. But I think over the years of working with you, it's a really smart play, because and I know myself being a business owner, you automatically assume that you're going to be doing this forever. Like, I can't imagine not doing this, but invariably there will be a time. So I think it's just a really smart way just to have a bit of a stop and check of your business. And as you were saying previously, to make sure that, your accounting structures are set up correctly. From a brokerage perspective, as you say, do you own your trail book? What are your objectives, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that there's a lot of value in terms of determining the value of your brokerage, as well as what as you were saying, Nick, your life goals, and just making sure that the both of them are really, really aligned, to make sure that, it just doesn't sneak up on you one day and you sort of start to go into retirement mode and then have that cold hard call of what you thought your business is worth, because you're so used to being in that growth mode is actually not. So why don't we move forward then in terms of the key metrics to then assess your company's performance, because obviously that has so much to do with what the business is actually worth. So what specific metrics do you use to assess a brokerage's performance, and therefore how you correlate what that brokerage is worth?
So the first bit is the trail book. I mean, that is it's probably 2/3 of the value of a business. We've mentioned here it's really about runoff rates that we're seeing in a particular moment in time. Everybody tries to tell me that their trail book is better than somebody else's trail book. I'm sorry, they're just all trees in the forest. I mean, they're just home loans. Let's not try and kid ourselves that my home loans are better than your home loans. They're just home loans. So it very quickly falls back into the averages. That said, I will, as we've spoken about, if it's older book, younger book, lots of fixed rates, lots of investment, yes, it goes up and down a little bit. But the really big killer is what runoff rates we're seeing at the moment. So 25% at the moment, the whole of Australia is experiencing higher runoff rates than historically normal, and maybe next year we'll see historically lower runoff rates than normal, but at the moment it is what it is. So that's the first bit. The goodwill, that's a much more fuzzy valuation. So the first thing about it is this idea about whether the business is growing or not. So premium or discount to what we might call a normal sort of valuation. The second thing is how easily will it be to effectively assign a client from, let's say, you, Sasha, the seller, to me, the buyer. Now, if your clients are all very wed to you, they just know Sasha. The business is called Sasha's U-Butte Mortgages, and it's all about business that you drum up when you're down the pub, of all the local mates that you play footy with, and I live in another town, I wear a suit, I'm male, it's not going to go very well. It's actually going to be a disaster. Conversely, if you've set your business up so that you're not so critical, in that there's proper systems, proper procedures, we do reviews here, I have support staff who are doing this. Yes, I can regularly go on holidays and the business doesn't collapse. I'm starting to actually wean myself out of the business. I've got other mortgage brokers potentially in there. Those are the sorts of businesses that will effectively assign across well to a new buyer, and therefore a new buyer is willing to pay an above average multiple for it. So dropping to the bottom line, let's just say a trail book's worth 2 times. Sas's U-Butte Mortgages, which is all consistent with you drumming up business in the pub on a Saturday night, it's probably worth about 2.1 times. An average business might be closing up on 3 times. A really, really good business might be worth, and it has to be really, really good, might be worth in excess of 3 times. So that's the sort of a broad ranges that we're talking with here.
Okay, well, that's a good overview. I've actually had a question come through, which I think is quite relevant to this particular section, from Catherine, saying, is there a simple formula on how to calculate runoff rates on the trail book?
Yeah, really simple.
Yep.
So,
Excellent.
Effectively, it's a group of loans. So on an Excel spreadsheet, we're now in, let's call it April, we're actually in May, but you'll have your April commission statements. Go back to April last year, look at the actual list of loans that were there, and particularly all the loans that settled up till, the 1st of March 2022. That's the number of loans. Look at the trail that they produced. We then flip forward 12 months and we look at all of those loans that settled up to the 1st of March 2022. A year later, how many are left? And particularly the trail that they're generating. So if all those loans a year ago were generating $1,000 and today those same loans are generating $800, then your runoff rate is 20%. If it's greater, higher, that's what it is. So it's pretty simple. On top of that, you're then writing new loans, which will obviously, it may mean that you're in fact writing more loans than what you're losing. You're writing less loans. That's where your business is in this decline growth phase. But it's just looking at that historical travel. Now, Sasha, I've lost your voice.
There we go. I've had another question come through from Priyank. What do you mean by 2 times and 3 times? Can you please elaborate? If someone has a monthly trail of 5K, what would that mean?
Yeah, sorry. Me slipping into industry lingo. It's 2 or 3 times the annualized trail income. So very simplistically, if last month you had $1,000 worth of trail, quick, dirty calculation, times that by $12,000, and we'll be talking 2 or 3 times that amount of money. The only slight trick to that game is when I'm really doing it more exactly is I actually look at the number of days in the month that particular commission run related to. It's not so important in the back end of the year, but we've just actually been through February, which is what I call the February effect. Your trail books in February run at 10% less. 28 days as compared to 31 days doesn't sound a lot, but it's 10%. And if you value a business on February, you'll come up with a number that's 10% less than what it really probably is worth.
Okay, thank you. We've actually had a whole load of questions come in, but I think that we'll be covering some of this content. So what we might actually do is just go back to your deck, Nick, and start to go into that next piece.
Yeah, so this, before we sort of look at this chart, a lot of people tell me that their retirement strategy, in fact, when I do this in a live room, I'll get people to put up their hands, who's planning on selling their trail book at the end of their careers. And only about, at best, 1/3 of the room will put their hand up. 2/3, let's say half people, mortgage brokers, will say that keeping my trail book is what I'm going to do in retirement. And in fact, they'll then proceed to tell me that my trail book has been generating 10 grand a month. It's been doing it for years, Nick. You don't understand. It's just so solid. Now, what they're missing is that they're in that mature phase and that they're putting loans in as fast as they're losing loans out the back end. So it appears to be staying at 10 grand a month. When you stop writing new loans stop writing new loans, your book goes into runoff. And it's just a fact of life. Now, what this little table here is showing is what a book running off at 20% per annum looks like. And it's pretty sobering. So, example, 10 grand a month, so $120,000 a year. I can live very happily in retirement, Nick, on $120,000 a year. I don't need to talk to you. I don't need to talk to anybody. I'm set up. Great. So what's that look like? At the end of year 1, it's now producing 96,000. At the end of year 2, it's now producing 77,000. The end of year 3, it's now producing 61,000. This is a 20% runoff. At the moment, we're seeing 25. The end of year 3, it's halved. So you are 3 years into retirement and your income has halved. You're feeling very sick. Now, the numbers in brackets on the right are actually the after-tax numbers. And that's what you start to feel really sick. So it just doesn't work. And the bit that some people might say, Nick, you get a bit passionate about this. half the reason I'm so passionate about this subject is because I get lots of phone calls from people who are effectively 2, 3, 4 years into this retirement strategy. They've got a lifestyle that's geared around $120,000 a year, and 2, 3 years in, the money's just not there, and they're in a hell of a mess. They've got bank card debts there. It's just horrible. Now, we can provide a bit of short-term relief by buying the remains of their trail book, but they've got another 30, 40 years of retirement to go. They're back on the pension. They thought they were sitting pretty, but they're not, and it's very sad.
So I think the real takeout of that is to really be so aware of that runoff rate.
It is so important. The other thing, which we'll come to in a second, is that they've absolutely squandered all of the goodwill. So they've just thrown that in the bin, and that's a third of the value, as we'll get to in a second. There's a retirement strategy, throwing all your clients in a bin and effectively thinking that your trail book's going to last forever. It is so flawed. It's just embarrassing. It just does not work.
All right. Well, we'll maybe then move on to why, going to the next slide, why after-tax value of your business is so important, because that's perhaps another area that the industry is not as aware of.
Yeah. So this is our friend John Howard did this, and he was a great advocate. I'm not saying he was the best prime minister in the world, but as far as tax concessions to small business people, he was fantastic. So he and his sidekick treasurer at the time were really keen that Australians embrace small business, and they recognise this trend that of people working for smaller businesses. So the problems with that, though, is that typically small business people don't put money aside for their retirement. It's when you're employed, you obviously 9% of your salary gets drafted off to superannuation. When you own a milk bar, it doesn't. So effectively, small business people, the way they thought of superannuation is, I'm building up this milk bar, I'm building up my business, and at my retirement, I will sell it, and I will be selling it for more money than what I originally paid for it, and the price that I sell for it is going to be effectively the funding of my retirement. Very normal strategy. So what they said is those sorts of people should be given a tax break. So these terrific tax concessions were given to small business people selling their business, essentially for retirement, but there's a couple of extra carves out. So effectively, if you are over 55 years of age, or you've been in the business for more than 15 years, potentially, and this is why it's so important to talk to your accountant, potentially you can sell your business and take the money tax-free. So I sell it for $100, $1 million, $10 million. The whole lot can potentially be tax-free if you qualify for these tax concessions. So again, this is where the planning comes in. The moment you start thinking about this game, talk to your accountant. Make sure that you are structured. If you're 13 years in and had enough, perhaps it might be a good idea just to hang on for another 2 years so that you can trigger the 15-year exemption. Talk to your accountant, make sure you clearly understand these exemptions. Going back to the, going back to this idea of keeping the trail book as opposed to selling it. What it means is effectively the proceeds of the sale can be tax-free, whereas the alternative of hanging on to it, you're going to be paying tax on all of that revenue. Sorry.
No, of course. We might actually go to a few more questions. It's great to have so many come through. So by all means, keep them coming. So we'll go to a few questions before we go to your top tips, Nick. So we've had a question come in from Nick saying, hi guys, a monthly trail of $1,000 made up of say 10 transactions versus a monthly trail of $1,000 made over 100 transactions. Would the latter book be of more value? So essentially a smaller versus a larger number of transactions.
Yes. So two things there. One, a book with $1,000 as opposed to a book with $10,000 will arguably attract a higher multiple. But I think the person there, Nick, good name, was also suggesting that the effectively diversification amongst a number of clients is better than having it all resting on the shoulders of a fewer number of clients. And yes, it's better. So effectively a higher multiple.
Okay, great. And then another very interesting question's coming from Andy. Does a mixed trail book, i.e. resi and commercial, have an impact on value?
Yes. You'll be recognising this, Sasha, as we're only talking about this yesterday, the commercial bit. Commercial's a really interesting game. Firstly, a lot of commercial loans don't have trail. So, well, they're worth probably nothing. It's all about the goodwill. And goodwill with commercial deals, it's just that little bit harder to arguably move them from the seller to the buyer. So it's I'm the first to say brokers should be diversifying, but commercial does introduce, I'll put it another way, a business that's all commercial is quite difficult to value, and you'll get a huge range, whereas a business that's all residential will probably get a tighter range of evaluation and is an easier animal to deal with.
Okay, I'll fire another one at you. This one's from Anthony. How is the sale of the business and or trail book taxed? Is it GC capital gains tax applicable?
Yes. So as a starting point, it is very much capital gains tax applicable. But then going back to those tax concessions, potentially you will get reductions on the capital gains that you have to pay. So the first one is you'll probably get a 50% reduction just because it is a capital gain and you're a small business person. But then, as we touched on that earlier slide, depending on where you are in your retirement cycle, over 55, been doing this for more than 15 years, there's rollover relief, you might be able to get that 50% all the way down to zero. Another trick, of course, is moving it into super. There's tax breaks there as well. So talk to your accountant.
And I guess to that point, there's so many areas that you would not necessarily think of that you can either, with good planning, really change substantially the amount that you'll be able to extract from your business.
Yes. So a good sale. So I'm working with a broker at the moment. He's sort of more of a friend, but he's planning on retiring in sort of 4 or 5 years' time, is his sort of game plan. But he's fixed on it. He's got his business in growth mode. He's in that last run. He's got his structures right. He's already starting to think about potential buyers of people that effectively could start to be brought into the business to effectively take him out. It's a big exercise for him. He will get more than 3 times for his business. I've got no doubt about that. He'll probably get 3.5, but it's a very well planned exercise. And indeed, the best deal I've ever done, I've seen, is a fellow who cracked 4 times. But again, big planning, very well thought out. He had the buyers worked out well in advance. It was done, and the transition, he didn't get 4 times all up front, or 4 and a bit times all up front. It was paid out over a couple of years. But, and by the way, all tax-free. Colossal result.
So speaking of calculations, I've had another question come in from Marco. How do you calculate the goodwill of business? That's what I imagine a trickier question.
That's why I earn the big bucks. Yeah, that's it's that fuzzy asset. It's really, really hard. So there's a problem in that. Let's just go back to you selling and me buying. You will have an inflated view about your clients, your business. You'll think it's fantastic. It's a bit like selling a used car. It's fantastic. The buyer will be inherently very suspicious. There'll be, like a Sasha, but you could go into competition with me. You could just be a liar. It could be just straight out fraud. All these things will be running through your mind. So invariably, the buyer will start with a low number. The seller will start with a high number. That's why trial book's so good. It's fact, it's there. Somebody like me can wander in and do a valuation quickly. The goodwill, very fuzzy. So this is where these systems, these procedures, other staff, proper business planning, the more and more that you can show me that, yeah, okay, this is like showing you logbooks of regularly servicing the car. I can look at the car, it's shiny, it looks good, everything about it. I can ring the mechanics, I can talk. It's really starting to look like it actually might be a decent car here, as opposed to, trust me, mate, it'll be fine. So those are the things that will start bumping up the valuation. The other thing that will make me feel happier is if you're actually willing to put skin in the game and say, listen, Nick, I really believe in my business, and I know that even after it's gone across to you, it's still going to keep on firing. So I'm willing to have some of the payment back-ended, or maybe proportional payments over a period of time, but depending on how the business performs over the next 1 or maybe even 2 years. So the person who got that big multiple in excess of 4 times, he had payments coming out over a 2-year period, because he really believed that the business would keep on firing, even though he was, in fact, that particular fellow was in Germany, believe it or not. He'd flown the coop well and truly, but he really believed in his business, and he got it because his business was true to form.
So I guess in terms of trying to put a definition on something which, as you say, is indefinable, I think what I'm really taking from that is business planning, having very clear business planning, and I would expect that should be done with an accountant. So if you're able to demonstrate your business and then demonstrate your business growth as per your plans, having, as you say, those tight systems, processes, procedures, which demonstrates that, when you do exit the business is in a robust state. And it's not just, all paper scattered around the place, so to speak. I would also expect the time that the company's been in business, as well as its reputation, is very important. So again, with my marketing hat on, I would really encourage brokers to be very proactive about getting Google My Business reviews and making sure that from a optics perspective, your company does appear sound, not only to attract good clients and to demonstrate your reputation, but to really make sure that you're presenting your business in its best light.
Couldn't agree more.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And just a clarification before we get into some of your tips, Nick, from Steve. He's just asked 2.5 times trail plus 3 times, 2.5 times trail plus 3 times upfront goodwill, or 3.
No.
So, it seems a little confused. So could you just provide some clarification about trail versus goodwill?
Broadly, as a rule of thumb, about a third of the value of the business will be in the trail book, and another 1 times, or another third. So 2/3 with the trail book, 1/3 with the goodwill. So when I say 3 times all up, it means probably about 2 times for the trail book and another 1 times for the goodwill. No, I'm sorry to say, but I haven't been associated with business that's got 6 times. That's all up. So, 3 times. So 2.5. Well, we started at 2.1, I think, for your business, Sasha, that you're running out of the front bar of the pub.
I don't know where you get this notion that I'm at the pub the whole time, Nick.
So yeah, let's say that range of, 2.1 through to 3 and a bit is probably the normal range. The other one I should also say is that the economy does also affect these valuations. So last year, there's a lot of money being made in the mortgage broking industry. So there are a lot of rich mortgage brokers running around. So multiples tended to be up a little bit. Things have settled back down again now, so it's getting back into what I would call a sort of a normal valuation time. So for better or for worse, that's what it is.
Okay. Well, we might just go to some of your top tips, and then if we have some more time, we'll go back to some questions. So in terms of some of the takeaways for the brokers listening today, what are the top tips that brokers in any stage of their business cycle can do to maximize the value of their brokerage?
So number one, get your structure right. If it's not right, change it now. The sooner you change it, the better, rather than just pretending it's the wrong structure and I'll fix it tomorrow. So that's a conversation with your accountant. It's
Sorry,
also
Nick, do you mean company structure?
Company structure, and partners, wills, all these sorts of things. I'll tell you another one that I unfortunately regularly get called on. And it is normally a woman, it's a widow, it's just the way the world is, and they're in a hell of a mess. Bob died yesterday in a car accident, and it's just a mess. And yeah, just make sure that if that does happen, that your partner is not going to be in such a mess. So, those sorts of things need to be done now, and it doesn't matter whether you're starting, ending, in the middle.
Yeah, so just get your ducks in a row.
Correct. The next one is just that systemised. It is hard work, but try and keep your business in a growth phase. It just makes such a difference. You don't actually have to be doing all the work yourself. You can look at a business objectively and say, listen, I actually only want to work 40 hours a week, but to keep the business in a growth phase, we're therefore going to have to bring in a partner. Other staff, they're going to have to also work to keep this business growing. It's good for you, it's good for the business. If it's reached a level that, no, I don't feel comfortable taking it anymore, and managing it, perhaps you should bring in a partner who has equity. Just all the time be thinking about, how does it work for me? How does it work for the business to keep this all happening, to keep us all developing? So perhaps a business partner, who has equity, who is going to, maybe even take the business on for me in the future, is a really good way to go. I'm doing a deal at the moment with a person in for want of a better word, a remote regional area. The only way she's really going to get out of her business is to bring in a business partner. There'll be very few buyers who come along desperate to want to work in that particular part of Australia. She's got to find business. So her exit is really to bring on business partners. So really be thinking about how this can all play out over time. So that's that one. The other one is just don't get complacent. I have this at the back end. I have this analogy of a surfer surfing. If you watch good surfers, I'm not a surfer, by the way, but you watch good surfers surfing, they'll invariably pull out of the wave when it's still got quite a bit of a wave left in it and go off and catch another wave. They don't bring it all the way into the beach. But you see many, many mortgage brokers who sort of drift into the beach without sort of realising it. And again, I'll get this phone call that, yes, I used to write $2 million a month, but these days I'm probably only doing $1 million, $500,000. And I know damn well that when I actually look at the books, that I'll find they're only actually writing one loan every 2 or 3 months. Their business is dead. It's just a trouble. So don't just let it creep up on you. Be proactive, be in control.
And I know that you're also, in terms of being proactive, you're also very much an advocate of prioritising goodwill. So how would you recommend that brokers do that?
I seem like a bit of a broken record here. Getting those systems, getting it documented, getting a methodology to how you run your business, so that you can pick it up and hand it over to somebody else. This is the recipe book. Follow this recipe book and you'll get the same result as me. But if there is no recipe book, who knows what you're going to end up? Probably a mess.
Okay, well, we've got some more questions coming through, so we might get through as many as we can. And if we don't get through all the questions within the hour that we have allocated, we will be sending a follow-up email with the presentation deck that Nick's been referring to, as well as Nick's email address. So you can by all means reach out to him as well.
And please do just ring me up. I sit around this office all the time, so just ring me up. I'll have a chat.
Yeah, just sitting back, kicking back.
Exactly, with my shoes in the background.
Yeah, love it. So we've had a question come in from Marie. Do the quality of the clients have any impact on the value? E.g. medicos, professionals, high net worth, first home buyers, and so forth.
Yes and no. I'm not going to tell you that a doctor is better than a school teacher or vice versa, but a business that is focused on a particular segment of the market, to me, is somebody who's really thinking and has built a fine business. So if you specialise in teachers or you specialise in doctors and you've got a whole program of how I run the business to attack that segment of the marketplace, hats off to you. That's a good business. I'm aware of a business that focuses on medicos. It's a fine business, will rep a business. That business would get a big multiple. You were telling me a story, I think, Sasha, of a mortgage broker that you admire who focuses on barristers. That's a slim slot. But I've never met him, don't know him, but I'll tell you here and now, that'll be a fine business. So teachers, whatever, firefighters, don't care, but that sort of thought carries a premium.
And I think it goes back to, again, with my marketing hat on, just owning your space and being very, very specific to your target market.
It's a really tight recipe book,
Exactly.
I am the best at making this particular type of meal, and I'm famous for it.
Excellent. So we'll move on. So we've got a question from Paul asking whether a high mix of reverse mortgages increases the multiple in the trail.
Yes. I haven't come across a broker yet who is actually specialised in this area. And it'll be a really interesting exercise to do it. Theoretically, the person who specialises in that area and does it well is going to get the biggest multiple the industry's ever seen, because their trail book will be worth a lot more than 2 times. It'll be probably worth 3 times. I don't know. I'll have to do the numbers, but a multiple that we've never seen. And then we will put the Goodwill factor on top of that. Because arguably a bit won't be running off at 20% per annum, or 25% per annum. So, but as I say, at this stage, I haven't come across a broker. We might have just found one out there who's just asked that question.
It's a good question.
Yeah, he's specialising in old people.
Okay, so moving on, I've got a question from Mike. What value would be placed on the database and associated contact details of the loan book and those other contacts in the database? In addition, when selling, if the seller includes their own phone number, website, email, etc., does that increase the value?
Yeah, so this whole Goodwill, and it's the ability to assign the clients. This database was producing $2 million a month for me. You take it over, you'll get $2 million a month. Now, if I just provide you with a list of numbers, names and email addresses, it's not actually worth a lot as far as I'm concerned, because the incoming broker, hi Sasha, my name's Nick. You used to be serviced by Brian. I bought Brian's database and I'm a mortgage broker and I see you've got a loan with Westpac and how would you like some life insurance? At the end of the phone call, you're probably not going to be thinking very much of me. Whereas if we've got Nick has merged his business with Brian, there's media, there's social, there's contacts coming out of Brian, there's contacts coming out of me. Brian's, moving a bit more into the, stepping back a little bit from management. Nick's coming in, this is a much warmer handover. That scenario is what I'm talking about as we really start getting some value for some goodwill. Telephone numbers and names, I mean, it's probably not much better than the white pages.
Okay, we've had a question come in from Tim. If your business also generates income from insurance and other add-ons, does that add value to the book when selling?
Yes and no. I mean, it's all so Allianz, those sorts of things. Yeah, I give it the same multiple as normal trail income. So on the book side, it's sort of the same. If somebody who's done, and it's the cross sell, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. It's the sign again of a good business. This is somebody who has been running their business. We don't just provide you with a mortgage, we provide you with a service. So let's think about everything else you're going to need to surround yourself with now that you're getting this home loan. It's the sign of a really strong business. And again, that means people will respect the brand name, want the brand name. It's worth more.
Okay, so we've had a question come through from Mike. Should the seller be prepared to sell a long-term, should the seller be prepared to do a long-term non-compete clause as part of the transaction? Would that increase the business's value?
Yes. But I think there needs to be a good story. And I've seen some very funny non-compete clauses where, you know, I won't talk to any of the existing clients, but I'm going to be setting up around the corner, or I'm not even setting up around the corner. I'm staying here and operating as a business. I mean, how do you police that? You know, and trying to police a non-compete clause is very difficult. It's much better in the scenario we just had where, you know, Brian actually stays much closer to me in a, not in a physical sense, but in a legal sense. So, you know, Brian might get ongoing share of the success, or Brian might be rewarded for sending in new referrals that he comes across in the street. Really thinking through, you know, how you can keep Brian engaged in the business, Brian being the seller, not through legal clauses, but because Brian actually just wants to see you succeed and see the clients transition across to you.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've got time for maybe one more question from Natasha. Does a brokerage with manual processes, big team, and less profitable to a brokerage with automated processes, how is that affected?
So is there also a manual with a big team there? Did I?
There's a brokerage that has a big team with manual processes. Is it less profitable to a brokerage with automated processes? So I think that would just come back to that goodwill piece in terms of having your business run efficiently.
Yeah, I think it depends too. A certain buyer might come into a business like that and say, well, if I can automate it, then it's going to become much more profitable. So that gives me sort of quick upside. I think the key things there is that the particular person was talking about systems being in place and that there is a big team. As soon as you mentioned big team, that suggests to me that we've actually built a fine business, whether it's running on manual systems or automated system, however it's been done, it's been successful. That's why it was big. So that's what the recipe book is. And, you know, it's probably that will, to me, gets the premium. And yeah, perhaps somebody might even go to the manual one and say, I'll give you a bit more because I can automate it. But on the other side of the coin, obviously, you know, an automated business is much easier to run, manage than a very manual business. So that's the flip side of the argument. So it depends. But big businesses, successful businesses are worth more than unsuccessful.
And I think that's the real takeout. It needs to be demonstrated that it's successful, and then anything that underpins that success to make it more efficient is just going to be a bonus.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you and I have both seen businesses where, you know, the broker writes handwritten notes, thank you cards, these sorts of things. You know, very, very manual, very, very time consuming. They're well received though. You know, people go, ugh.
Indeed. Well, we'll unfortunately have to stop there. Thank you so much, Nick. You've been insightful as always. And again, thank you so much to all the participants who took part today. We'll be in touch very soon with CPD points as well as the presentation and Nick's details. So thanks again and see you next time.
Thank you. And don't hesitate to call if you want to talk further. Bye for now.